Hello and welcome to Palace Confidential. It's the Mail Plus's weekly look at the latest royal news, stories and intrigue, recorded just a stone's throw from Kensington Palace. I'm Jo Elvin, and joining me today is a trio of the Daily Mail's best experts and commentators. We have royal watcher Robert Hardman, hello, columnist extraordinaire Sarah Vine, and diarist and man about town Richard Eden. Thank you for joining us today. Coming up on today's show, royal historian Kate Williams places Harry and Meghan in the context of another constitutional crisis, as one influential Canadian newspaper says the royals aren't welcome there. We ask, can they make it work? And we get the opinions at Buckingham Palace, not those of Her Majesty, I'm sorry, but the thoughts of the royal fans. But first, Megxit or Harry Videerci, whatever you call it, there has been one story dominating the news this week, and one story only, the bombshell that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were to step back as senior royals and move to North America has dominated the news agenda. The Queen has reluctantly agreed, and negotiations between the houses continue. This morning, Harry appeared at Buckingham Palace to launch the Rugby League World Cup for what is being billed as possibly his last major appearance before he moves away. Sarah, how do you think people will feel?
I think it's all still to play for. I mean, we don't really know what's happening. I mean, the Palace still haven't reached any kind of agreement as far as we know.
They can't really figure out what to do.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's just very difficult for them because, well, it's odd because she's off in Canada now visiting women's centres. They seem to be sort of putting on a sort of decent front, but meanwhile, all eyes are on Kate and William, who are kind of holding the fort really by going and doing their royal duties, sort of, you know, very sort of hearty kind of, you know,
and it's
jolly
not looking
way.
Sort of like smug and stoical at all, is it?
No. I mean, I think the public have a lot of sympathy for Harry and Meghan as a sort of young couple starting out on life, trying to kind of forge an identity for themselves. But I think the way in which they've done it is just really childish and silly and just actually very disruptive. I mean, they could have perfectly easily have tried to settle it all with the Queen before making any kind of announcement, instead of which they went on a 6-week holiday. I mean, who goes on a 6-week holiday? I don't think even the Queen gets a 6-week holiday, but they got a 6-week holiday, and then they came back and threw all their toys out of the pram. And now we're sort of in a sort of messy situation where the Palace are trying to catch up. They're trying to belatedly work out some kind of arrangement. And again, as you say, we don't know if Harry's got anything in the diary past next week. What's he going to do? Go and sit in Soho House in LA and drink cocktails?
Sarah, today, well, we had Harry at the Palace, and then we had Meghan carrying out unofficial engagements in Canada. Well,
explain that to me, Richard. I mean, you know how these things work. It was a secret visit, and then suddenly I know all about it. How does that actually work?
Well, to one of them, it was apparently it was an aide of Meghan had rung up to say, you know, would you like to have a visit from a VIP visitor? And they arranged it very short notice, and then she turns up, and then immediately it's put on social media, and it's her unofficial engagement. So you've got a sort of parallel competition now between the official royals here and semi-unofficial royal in Meghan in Canada.
And what's your view of what would be the Palace's feeling about these unofficial duties?
Well, they probably won't even know about them till they read about them online. It's just crazy. They must be very worried, and we still don't know if today's engagement by Prince Harry was his curtain call, and could it be his last? The Queen has yet to announce if she's going to allow him to carry on.
I mean, I think this is the issue here, is this sort of rogue behaviour, where you just sort of decide unilaterally that you're going to put on a pair of nice trousers and visit a women's centre. That's not really how the royal family operates, is it?
But what about you? I mean, Robert, a lot of people are calling this something of a constitutional crisis. I mean, which seems, you know, hysterical to me. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's overdoing it a bit. There aren't any constitutional implications really. Harry is sixth in line to the throne and proceeding ever downwards as those above him replicate. So he's not going to be king. And therefore this isn't Edward and Wallis. However, it's definitely a royal crisis because you've got a young couple who have effectively issued a unilateral declaration of independence from the family and have said, we're going to do things on our terms. And they've said that before consulting with the Queen. And that's just not the way that you do things with the Queen. The authority, the very reason that Harry is such a famous, one of the most famous young men on the planet, he derives that fame from Her Majesty, from his royal status. And everyone at the palace is very conscious it's the Queen who's in charge. So you don't lay down the law with the Queen, say this is what we're going to do. Any thoughts? She has, I think she's extremely sad about it. I think she's handled it in just the right way, which is to not read the Riot Act. She's listened. She convened this summit earlier this week, which was an extraordinary moment.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, because I think a lot of people, it's been really brought home to me as not an expert royal watcher, that the royal family is, at the end of the day, run like a business now. I mean, how does it work with negotiations with something like this?
It's not so much a business, but I suppose it's more like a sort of government department. I mean, you've got different ministers within a ministry, but there's no question of who's in charge, and all the different the sort of senior players have a vested interest in this. The Queen, obviously, because she's in charge of the whole show. The Prince of Wales as, firstly, a concerned father, but also a future king. Don't forget that at the moment, Harry and Meghan's bills are largely met by the Prince's income as Duke of Cornwall. Once there's a change of reign, the Duchy of Cornwall, all its money, everything, that goes to Prince William, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, for their family. Harry moves across to the King's payroll, if you like. He follows his father to Buckingham Palace, well, at least his officials will. We don't know where the couple themselves will be living. So, these are the complications. But William has a very key role in all this, not just as a concerned brother who's, I think, feeling extremely upset by the way things have gone, but also whatever the outcome of these negotiations, the next people who are actually going to be directly affected by them are going to be William's and Kate's children. They're going to be Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, because whatever the new template for younger children of a monarch are going to apply to his children.
Well, I think, there's a lot of scorn that comes with being born with a silver spoon in your mouth in that way, but also it's such a prison as well. And I think
it is, but it's a trade-off. It's always been this contract between the public and the royal family. We don't mind them living in palaces and leading a life of extraordinary privilege, as long as at the same time they acknowledge they've got to turn out on a wet Wednesday in Scunthorpe, and that there are things they have to do, but the bottom line is that we have to feel they are on our side. And I think when you stop doing that, you start to forfeit public sympathy and public consent, and monarchy thrives on consent, and it's why they've got to be extremely careful how they juggle this. I mean, there's a very fine line between royalty and celebrity, and I think those two are having trouble coming to terms of where that line lies, and that's the big issue for the monarchy.
It's absolutely fascinating. But first, we mentioned earlier the abdication of King Edward VIII, the Queen's uncle, but Professor Kate Williams has been telling us that there are more recent parallels.
As soon as Harry and Meghan announced they were stepping back as senior royals, excitable parallels were drawn with the 1936 abdication of Edward VIII. True? No. This is a story about our society and how we treat our royal wives and a woman of colour, more than it's about the past. Let's take a look. There's no comparison between the abdication of Edward VIII and Harry and Meghan. Quite simply, Harry is not the king, throwing the country into constitutional crisis. He's a minor royal choosing to spend more time in North America. In 1936, Edward had not been on the throne for a year before he abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson. He wanted to marry her and she was divorced. He couldn't do so if he was king. This is a completely different situation, and this is why. Number one, the abdication was a constitutional crisis, and it actually threatened to bring down the government. The Prime Minister felt that Winston Churchill might use it as a coup against him. It also could have brought down the monarchy, but now the Sussex decision has no effect on politics. Our government is completely unruffled, and the monarchy, it's going to be fine. It's just actually a little bump, and I think in the future this could be the better beginnings, a new way. Number two, big difference, divorce. Well, then divorce was anathema, but now basically the large part of the royal family are divorced. Our future king is divorced, his future consort is divorced, many members of the royal family are divorced, pretty much apart from the Queen and Prince Philip and Will and Kate. So it's really immaterial that Meghan is divorced. And another big thing is the fact that Edward was an exile. Edward was forced out. He wanted to stay in the country, but they said no because they didn't want two rival kings. Edward wasn't allowed back for royal events. He couldn't even watch the coronation of his niece as Elizabeth II. He watched it in the House of Friends in Paris on a gold-painted chair. But Harry is still an active member of the royal family. He and Meghan will be doing engagements for the Queen abroad. They'll be here, they'll be travelling, and they're actually going to be here quite a lot, just not exactly as much. And there's also the difference that when it came to Wallis and Edward, the press held back. They didn't report it. But in this age of scrutiny, the social media, Harry and Meghan have been pursued from the beginning. But one similarity, Meghan and Wallis have been vilified and unfairly blamed for the decisions of their husbands. And what about the more recent past? People say to me, oh well, Diana had it hard. And I despair because Diana was made desperately ill and she suffered and she died being chased by the paps. Harry said he feared his wife falling victim to the same powerful forces as his mother. He warned Meghan. And so we might ask ourselves after all this, who'd marry into the royal family, especially a woman of colour? It's a world of suffering. Yes, there's wealth and privilege, but it's not worth it. And I think we'd all like to date Harry. That'll be fun. But marriage, I don't think so.
Lot to unpack there. I'm going to start with you, Sarah. In your column this week, you said that Meghan was being unfairly held responsible, which I'll be honest, I was surprised to hear you say that.
Well, I think that as a, there is a narrative that women are always to blame when a man does something that we don't expect him to do. And I think I was possibly thinking a little bit of the fact that I was labelled Lady Macbeth when I dared to have an opinion about my husband's the pushy wife trope. And I think that she is. I think that there is quite a sort of misogynistic attitude towards her in the sense that people think, oh, she's come along and she's stolen away our lovely Harry, and she's with her womanly wiles and her witchy ways and all that kind of stuff. And I think I don't think that's the case. I think that Harry is, he's a grown up and he can make his own decisions, and of course she will influence them, but I don't think that I think she's been a catalyst for him in a funny kind of way. I don't think she's the cause.
We're very cynical, aren't we, about Hollywood confidence in this country?
But I think that Harry is damaged because of obviously what happened to his mother. Would be damaging for anyone. It has been very damaging for him. I think he feels a lot of anger towards his father because of the way he treated Diana and all that kind of stuff, and that's difficult. And I think when you have a child as well, I know this from my own experience, that when you have your own children, your own childhood experiences suddenly sort of they bubble back up again. And I think that I think his marriage to Meghan, I think he chose a woman who was very separate from his upbringing, who was different, who was, as we all said, a real breath of fresh air, someone completely, from a completely different background that opened up all sorts of other options. She's absolutely not, Meghan is not the sort of standard bred for a royal, nice Sloane, who's glossy and properly educated in order to attract an upper class male. She's very, very different, and I think I think that his choice reflects that, and I think so. He does also bear responsibility for what they're doing, and I, in a funny kind of way, part of me thinks that I rather respect him for it, because I think it takes real courage for a man to go against everything that he stands for, and Harry, as we said, is an integral part of the royal family, in order to make the woman he loves happy. Now, I don't know whether his actions will make her happy. Yeah. We don't know whether that's ever possible. But I I kind of like it in a funny kind of a way. Although I do think, as I said before, the way they've done it has just been absurd and ridiculous and incredibly incompetent and childish.
What do you think is people's opinion of Meghan now, Richard?
I think it's very mixed. People have compared it with Brexit in that we have...
There's a word for it, I believe.
We're always very nervous about mentioning Brexit at dinner parties. And so it's a bit like that with Harry and Meghan. You never quite know how the conversation's going to go.
There's been a lot of furious rows on my Facebook page with people. It is the new divide.
Yeah, I mean, it's social media, I get the impression that certainly in America and overseas there's a lot of support for Meghan, whereas the British were always maybe a bit more wary because she was American and she was the outsider, whereas everyone's always loved Harry. But who knows?
Do you think we've been unfair to Meghan?
I'm sure some of the time we've been unfair to Meghan in the way that public figures will get a mixed press, and most of it I would say is fair, but some of it isn't. I think there is a cultural dimension to this very clearly, which is she's a very accomplished celebrity on a number of fronts, Meghan. Way before she met Harry, I think there's a sort of rather lazy narrative that she's just another sort of Hollywood wannabe who married into the royal family and was doing quite well as an actress. She'd done really serious stuff.
Yeah.
She was one of very few US celebrities who'd been out to Afghanistan. This is a long time before she met Harry, to entertain the troops. Very brave thing to do. I mean, most celebrities' idea of sort of engagement with a social issue is to sort of do the odd sort of nice fluffy tweet and maybe turn up at the odd sort of red carpet thing, but that's it. She got out there, she walked the walk, and she really got stuck in with a lot of charities at not at a sort of high profile look at me level. So I had very high hopes. I thought, she's got what it takes to, as it were, blend the sort of Hollywood dimension with what the royal family need. I still hope it can be made to work. I think we're all being a bit fatalistic about this, but I do think that there is a cultural struggle that's been going on really ever since the wedding day between the royal way of doing things, the palace private secretaries and that sort of thing, and the Hollywood way of doing things. And she has still got her Hollywood advisors, her sort of stylists and agents and lawyers and these people who've been telling her what to do. And I think they've been sort of torn between that and the more traditional palace officials.
And also
saying
I
this
think
is the way you do it.
it's
And now we see that Hollywood has won.
Yeah, but I'm fascinated because I think there's still going to be that tension between we are aiming to be financially independent with what they need to have the power of Brand Sussex. I mean, what is Brand Sussex?
But the thing
going
is
to
when
mean?
they started out, they sort of went down the very traditional route. Well, I thought they did, because they got the big white wedding, and then they had Frogmore Cottage. And I remember at the time thinking, Meghan's not going to want to go and sit in a slightly damp, dark
That was
cottage
purely
in
they
the
didn't
home
want to live
counties.
next door to William.
Why didn't they buy themselves a
Live in a
night?
ditch.
So I mean, I thought right from the start that's an odd thing for them to do. I cannot see her pushing a pram around Windsor Park and being happy doing that, knowing where she, knowing what she's done already in her life.
It's going to be a holiday home. Let's face it.
Yeah. So I think they sort of got. Maybe, I don't know, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors at the palace. They might have been asking for this for ages.
But is there a genuine possibility of palace officials finding to their horror one day tubs of Team Sussex margarine in the Sainsbury's cabinet? I mean, what are they going to be doing?
I think they're clearly going to be wise and savvy enough to not go down the really naff route. I mean, as Kate Williams alluded to in her piece there, this isn't Wallace and Simpson, but there are certainly parallels of when Diana, Princess of Wales, was trying to forge a new post-royal life, as indeed was Sarah, Duchess of York.
I mean, there's certainly been a lot of bizarre things trademarked, though. There's been a lot of everything from hoodies to.
But this is what the Hollywood lawyer agent teams will tell you. This is absolutely standard practice for a celebrity in Hollywood.
Robert's being very kind to Prince Harry, but then when you see him in action, literally just buttonholing the boss of Disney at an event like a premiere, I mean, you could see the face and his wife's face. They were shocked when they saw Harry behaving like this. So the idea that we're not going to see
what they do in Hollywood all the time. I mean, you're better tuned into the show.
No, that was why people were shocked.
Full of sharp-elbowed people.
They would do
Are you
it
sure that was
subtly.
unprecedented, or it's just the first time anything like that's been caught on camera?
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
And we ran a story in my column before Christmas how Sussex Royal, they've trademarked that name for everything. And at the time, the palace was, oh no, don't worry, it's just routine, it's just routine. But then people realise, now they can see the context and see what the plans could be. So who knows?
Money is an interesting question, I think, because the royals get themselves in terrible pickles over money. Let's look at Andrew. Let's look at Fergie and the way that they've compromised themselves on a number of levels on a number of occasions because they don't have enough money to run their households. So I think it's really important that they establish what income they're going to get and where it's going to get.
From what I hear, they have a very clever model, which their plan is for Prince Harry to keep doing the voluntary work and the engagements, and then Meghan will do a lot more of the commercial work. So they'll split
like
it in that way. Exactly. So she'll be an ambassador for some big corporations, but Harry won't. And that will help to try and sort of keep the palace on side.
And you look at people like, for example, the Beckhams. David Beckham
Oh my
now
gosh,
hasn't
but
kicked a ball for what, 10 years?
I
And he
can't
makes
bear
more
the
money than
idea.
he ever did.
And
But
they're
comparing-
doing, they've got a very good setup. Now, I'm not saying
The
that
Beckhams
the
are a very good
Sussexes are
example.
not going to be exactly like the Beckhams, but what the Beckhams have shown is that celebrity is a far more lucrative and sellable commodity today than it was a few years ago. So I think they will achieve financial independence. I think Harry will still carry on doing good royal things, both abroad, particularly in the Commonwealth, and come back now and then and do
I think
stuff
the
here.
Beckhams is a perfect
I think
comparison.
I can't bear
we're not,
the idea
today's
of the
not the
royals
end
being
of anything.
compared to the Beckhams.
No, you've got Posh and Beggs. Now you're going to have Posh and Megs.
That's just insane, right? Surely the royals will be up in arms about that sort of, like, surely it's a slippery slope, that sort of degree of commercialisation.
Well, the question is fundamentally how much can you capitalise on the royal title? And I think for a lot of British people, the idea that you're using your royal title to make money is fundamentally a bit grubby, I think.
Well,
I don't
think
know.
I
What do you
agree.
think, Robert?
Exactly. I think you're right. I think it's a fine line, and the public, like I said, they will accept the royal family living a life of privilege in state-supported palaces and castles, because there's this compact, and people know there are restrictions on what they can and can't do, and people will usually say, I couldn't bear being royal. I mean, I love looking at them, but I couldn't live that
I think
existence.
you do very well, Robert. There's a hell of a lot wider implications of the royals cashing in on their name, and if Meghan is allowed to do it, I mean, imagine how Prince Edward and Sophie will feel when they've been banned for years from any commercial activities. It really just undermines the whole case, the whole support for the monarchy that we have. So I really wouldn't underplay the significance of what's happened in the past week.
If it does get out of hand, then I think you will see politicians starting to get involved, and at that point then it does take on a constitutional dimension. If you've got, and we've already seen a few rumblings in the Canadian press saying that actually we don't really want a sort of fully operational royal couple living here. It's not what
and that's the other
Canada's all about.
complication, though, isn't it? If they're living there, who's funding that
Well,
kind of thing?
but I think once, it doesn't really matter, there's politicians in the UK or Canada or other parts of let's not forget the Queen is queen of 16 countries, 15 countries other than this one. They may all have a view on this, we don't know yet. And if that then does become some sort of a political issue, then there is a sort of constitutional dimension. Now, we don't know yet, because all this is still being thrashed out. But like I say, today feels like the start of a new chapter rather than the end of the
My
story.
fellow countrymen Republicans, the voices will start to be getting very loud on that one. But I want to change the subject slightly, because I want to talk about, Professor Williams mentioned Diana and being stripped of her HRH, and I think there's been sort of a lot of chat about eventually that stripping of that title and that stripping away of her security detail did inadvertently lead her down to the disastrous demise that we had. I mean, is that something that needs to be of concern? What do you think, Sarah?
Well, I think their capital will start to ebb away as they distance themselves from the actual core royal family. There's no question about it. But it didn't just happen to Diana. It happened to Fergie. It happens to all royals who sort of disassociate themselves with the core family. And I think that's something they need to be very careful about. I think with Diana it was a very unusual case, and a perfect storm of a variety of things that led to what happened, which was obviously a horrible tragedy. I think that there are other factors here which I don't know, Robert would know more about than me, but Prince Philip is very old and very ill, and the Queen is not the youngest. I mean, the royal family face a lot of change, I'd say fairly imminently anyway. And I think that I just think the way the Queen has handled it, given the other pressures on her, given the thing with Andrew, given the thing with Philip, is just absolutely,
Andrew must be delighted, right?
Well, he's certainly off the front pages for now, but I mean, just yesterday out came a statement that got barely noticed at all, but in a few weeks' time the Queen will be welcoming the new Emperor and Empress of Japan on a state visit. We're going to soon be into the whole, some fairly big anniversaries coming up this year. We've got the 75th anniversary of VE Day and VJ Day. Those are going to be big moments that are going to remind us of the role the monarchy plays at the heart of our national life. I mean, this is January. The royal machine isn't really back up and running yet, but they're going to be hitting the road over the next few weeks, and we're going to see more and more of traditional royal life.
We can sit around all day being opinionated. But what we wanted to know is what you thought of the matter, and where better to speak to the general public than outside Buckingham Palace. The answers might surprise you.
Team Sussex.
Team Sussex. Woo!
Team Sussex, okay.
Team
We're
Sussex.
Sussex.
Team Sussex.
I'm leaning a bit Team Sussex, to be honest with you. Just because I feel like with the whole monarchy, it's not as powerful as it used to be.
Team Sussex. Team Sussex.
Everyone else before her has been pure, like Diana, Kate, and all that. And I think just to stir the pot a little bit, and they don't like that. They like things to be the same, and they don't like change.
Both. Team Windsor and Sussex.
Team Sussex.
Team Sussex. Team Sussex.
I'm going to have to sit on the fence on that one because I'm not sure which one of the two. I believe on both sides. I understand them both. They're born with it, really, so I don't think he can share the title, but he could probably shirk responsibility.
No, I don't think so, because they can still do so much good for those charities they support, and I'd like to see them continue that.
If you look at how old they are, and if you look at how old the Queen is, there's a 60-year age gap at that point to where in 10 years they may think, hey, I might want to get back into this. I want to help the monarchy. I want to help England.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they should.
No, they shouldn't.
It should be an option to be back in with the family and things like that. So removing the title completely is a bit over the top for me, and it seems like the Queen understands.
Yes, it's fair. No.
I feel like this whole idea of kings and queens and the whole thought of the royal family is simply living in the past.
Yes, they should.
It's going to be a big shame, I think, for everybody, but you can understand why they would want to step back.
Absolutely not, but I mean, they're probably going to if they go ahead with it.
I just think the monarchy's got to modernise. You know, they shouldn't have staid roles anymore. They should be more independent to do what they will.
Well, that was interesting, and maybe a sign of how it's being seen around the globe. I don't know. I want to ask you all, will they make it on their own? What do we think? What's your gut feeling, Richard?
I think it's going to be fascinating for all of us in the media. Whether it's good for the country is another matter.
Yeah, they'll be fine. I mean, the question is whether their relationship will survive it. That's the difficulty.
Well, yeah.
Because you know, if you unplug them, if you unplug Harry from his admittedly dysfunctional existence, how is he going to work? I mean, you give him the red pill, which is basically, is he going to be? Has
anyone thought of that? Yeah.
Is he going to be all right? I mean, and these are big questions, because if they do go and live in North America, he's going to live on her terms, and that's a big deal for a relationship, I think.
And presumably you think they'll be fine, Robert?
I think they'll find a way of making it work. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen straight away, but I think they are a very strong. They're a strong couple, they're a strong brand, they have enormous goodwill behind them, so I think they'll be okay. But equally, I think, the mothership, Royal HQ, the monarchy, is absolutely as strong as ever, and it will be fine too. I'm just hoping that they come to an accommodation with each other over time, and I suspect they probably will. I mean, the monarchy does have an extraordinary resilience.
Yeah.
The number of times as a fairly long-in-the-tooth royal hack, I've sort of sat there and listened to people go, oh, this is an absolutely unparalleled, unprecedented crisis. And they are unprecedented usually because they are a little bit unlike the one that happened before. But you know what? It always sails through, it comes through, as there are rocky moments, but deep down it's been going 1,000 years. It's incredibly popular. It's far more popular than any of the alternatives. And it goes to the heart, I think, of the British mindset.
I love some of your chill, Robert. I like it.
I'm not too worried.
Tell me, Team Sussex or Team Windsor?
Both.
No.
Okay.
You've got to pick.
Team Windsor.
Gun to your head.
Team Windsor will always win
Sarah?
out.
I'm Team Windsor.
Team Sussex, just for the stories.
And I'm definitely going to sit on the fence.
You're a terrible man. Did you know that?
Thank you very much. This is just endlessly fascinating. I'm sure that there'll be more to speak about in the next episode of Palace Confidential. But for now, I want to thank all my panellists for joining me, and thank you and see you next time.